Yeah, so this guy, Edward Dowis Dekker, who wrote, as you say, under the name Multatuli, Latin for I have suffered much, he was a Dutchman who worked in the Dutch East Indies and who went there and was really shocked by the exploitation of the locals of the resources. And he came back to the Netherlands and tried to be a whistleblower, but people didn't really care. And the Netherlands was becoming a really rich culture because of sugar and coffee and so on through the Dutch East Indies. So eventually he wrote a novel that's it's a kind of an autobiographical novel, but with a different name called Max Havelaar, about a guy who it's basically his story. He goes there, sees what's happening, comes back. So it's an expose in the form of a novel. And this novel, Max Havelaar, came out when Bavinck was 6. So it's part of his childhood, and it was explosive. It was the novel, it's been called, that killed colonialism. So it's profoundly anti-Christian, anti-colonial, anti-Calvinist, all of these things. And it still is a factor, and it's a classic of Dutch literature. So if you go into a Dutch supermarket today, the fair trade brand that you have on bananas, for example, is called Max Havelaar, named after the
Mm,
novels. You see it in the supermarket even,
mm,
in terms of the Dutch consciousness towards the effects of colonialism on Java. So this book came out when Bavinck was a child, and it had a huge impact. It was just massive, so he's the first atheist Dutch literary great. It's a book that then accelerates the de-Christianization and the secularization of Dutch culture. And this is just part of Bavinck's cultural context as he's growing up. That Multatuli is wildly popular with Dutch young people. So Abraham Kuyper, for example, when he was young before his conversion, was a big Multatuli fan. He gave a copy of Max Havelaar to his girlfriend's parents to try and win them over to its way of thinking and to civilize them by getting them to read some great new literature.
mm.
So this is just there in the background. And then when Bavinck went to study at Leiden, he went to a debating club where Multatuli was the speaker. And what Bavinck was really struck by was a confusing experience, because as a Christian, when you hear about the exploitation of the locals in the East Indies, and it was truly appalling, Bavinck's conscience is really pricked by this, to think this is awful, and it's good that this atheist is standing up and denouncing it through a sense of justice and righteousness. And yet at the same time, the novel is also a kind of parody and attack on Dutch Reformed Christianity as complicit in this whole system of oppression and exploitation. So it's a confusing experience for a young person in that kind of a setting. So what do you do with that? So he heard Multatuli in person. We know from his receipts book that he bought a copy of Multatuli's work there, and he engages with it quite a lot throughout his mature thought and his writing as well, because he's such a huge figure in the Dutch landscape that you can't ignore him. Bavinck is really ironic and always tries to find the grain of truth even in the arguments of the person that ultimately he's not on the same side as. Bavinck's in one of his most important parliamentary speeches later in life, when he was a member of parliament, he praised Multatuli for the capacity of his soul to be filled with righteous anger against things that need to be changed in the world. But he says at the same time, I never bowed down at his feet, like half of my friends did. But what's really interesting in his student years, when he first hears him and enters his company, is that at the debating society around the same time, he also hears this young upstart in the Dutch Reformed Calvinist world, Abraham Kuyper, and was really captivated by him as well. So Multatuli, on the one hand, is saying, we need to have an atheist future. We need, and Christianity is a part of the problem. It needs to go, and we need a secular future. Whereas he also hears Kuyper presenting this completely different view of where Dutch culture needs to go, which is that Calvinism answers all the problems of modern life, and it has all the resources. It needs to be developed, but I, Abraham Kuyper, am developing it, and I want other young theologians to join me. So what I think is really significant is that Bavinck buys Multatuli's book and really reads it thoughtfully, but
Right.
around the same time he also buys a picture of Abraham Kuyper, a Kuyper poster, and so you can imagine that on the wall of his room as a student. Kuyper also does what Bavinck is looking for. He also is really passionate, can be very fiery about things that need to change in the world. So I think it's such a fascinating point of Bavinck's life to be able to look in on, as he, just this privileged education again means that he actually comes
Right.
into direct contact with these people who are trying to shape visions of the future.